I just found a gap in history, and I'm trying to understand, where were the Asian and Hispanic kids during the segregation era? Like when it was whites only and coloreds only and the black people were integrating into white schools. Where were the other races of people at? Because when you look at the history books, you only see black and white kids. Like you see an all black school and an all white school, and that's how they talk about it in the history books. Like, this school's all white and this school's all black. And and I know they said colored, so you'd be like, oh, like everybody, but you never saw Asian kids at black schools. They weren't in the pictures. Or Spanish kids at black schools. So where did they go to school? And did they not care about integration? Like, when did they come into the equation and start integrating too? Why is that such a gap? Am I tripping? Maybe I'm skipping a part of it. I feel like learning history my whole life, they've never talked about. They never talked about the integration of Asian Americans into white schools, or Spanish or Hispanic people into white schools. They never talked about that. So I don't know. It's just a thought. I just crossed my mind right now, so I just thought I'd say it out loud.
Hi guys, welcome back to our channel. In case you're new here, my name is Maren.
And I'm Maureen.
Right, so in today's episode, you're going to be reacting to a video of a Hispanic lady who was curious and asked a very valid question, yeah? And she was asking, where were Asian Americans and Hispanics during the Jim Crow law? And we found a video of a brother who tried to answer her question to the best of his knowledge.
Right, so this is one of those videos where it's just an educative piece, and we decided to bring it here to you guys so that some of you can learn from it. So let's watch this video and then we come back and talk about it. Please let us know what you think about this video, and also consider subscribing if you're new to our channel. Let's watch.
I just found a gap in history, and I'm trying to understand, where were the Asian and Hispanic kids during the segregation era? Like when it was whites only and coloreds only.
Hi, political science major here. They were here. There is no gap. What you might be experiencing or might think is a gap is probably the lack of the vocalization of the stories, or the stories not being told all throughout textbooks. But for someone like me who went to college for this, it's right there. It's in the history books, and it was in some of my high school history books as well, to be fair to our government. Okay, I'm going to try to use three things to try to layer out why I think you may feel like there was a gap, or why it seems like that story is not being told or vocalized. The three things are population, location, and assimilation. I'm going to try as best as I can to use facts and not try to opine too much. All right. So the first one's population. So during the height of which we consider the civil rights era, supported by my background here, 85% of the population was white. 11% was black, less than 4% was Latino, less than 6% was for foreign born, and I'm presuming that remaining kind of like 0.00 some percent, like in 1960, for example, I think 980,000 people identified as Asian. So that's a very small number. And I think we can conclude that with population, the larger population will have a bigger impact as far as their story being told, as far as their fight for freedom, right? So 11% of black people going through, not all 11, but you get my point, going through Jim Crow segregation and marching. That is obviously going to make the worldwide news. There's going to be more stories written about those marches in the history book. Okay. Now, if you compare that Latino population to now, this is probably why you're seeing this discrepancy. It doesn't make sense to you. The Latino population, I believe, is going to be more than almost 22% of the U.S. population. That is a huge jump. Okay. But during the 1960s, these fights were there, right? Or even before the 1960s, right? There are a number of, Latino fight for segregation, for desegregation, right? So you see Mexican Americans going through segregation in California schools, right? There were riots. There were things like the Zoot Suit riots in the 1940s, which was also in Los Angeles, California, which leads me to my next point, which is location. So here's the thing. America's makeup, how it is now and how we know it now, is a lot different from what it was back in the 1950s and 1960s in terms of location and demographics. Okay, so in America, a large part of what most people focused on and cared about, especially is the northern part of America and the South. But a lot of places where the Latino population, remember, we've established that they were small, they were located in the southwest part of America. Okay, and the fundamental difference between the southwest part of America's segregation versus the southern segregation, where a lot of Black African American people were, is they didn't have these laws coded. They didn't have these segregation laws coded. They didn't have these English only laws coded, unlike the Deep South, in which they had these segregation laws, Jim Crow laws, most of the time, not all the time, coded. Okay, so that's kind of the first problem. The second thing is, again, how much attention was paid to the western portion of America. Like, California now to have, a large number of electoral votes, right? It to be immensely populated. It to be a integral part to America now. The New Mexicos and whatever of the world. It didn't used to always be like that. So it was easier for what was going on in the western part of America to, either not be documented, to either not be looked at with, analyzed with deep lenses. But as you can see here, for context, there are documented, lawsuits of Mexican American parents suing Orange County, California school districts on behalf of their children and 5,000 other children of Mexican and Latin descent, arguing that the segregation, even though it was not coded in the law, was violating their constitutional rights. So these things existed. It was there. It happened. Okay. So, like, for context, if you go to learningforjustice.org, you'll see some of just documented history of the fight by Mexican, Hispanic population from the 60s on, things like the Latino high school walkouts, and you'll see it. It's there. You can even go back as early as the 1910s and see, what the Hispanic population was doing. And then there also stuff about the Asian population, but again, it was different. When we talk about the Chinese with the gold rush, that's a little more complex, and I just want to keep this as simple as possible, right? It's there. Like, it's right there. There was a Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund that pursued protection of civil rights of Mexican Americans. Like, it's there. Okay, that's just my main point. Now, my final point is more of kind of an opinion or conclusion / inference that I've drawn, and which is the concept of assimilation. I think that unlike Black Americans, I think that there is an easier path to assimilation for Hispanic Americans and sometimes Asian Americans in the United States, but particularly with Hispanic Americans, to be able to assimilate into whiteness, right? And I think that because of that, year over year assimilation, even though some people may still identify as Hispanic, I think that there is less incentive to, regurgitate and or keep putting the story of America's treatment of their forefathers to the forefront. This part is mostly opinion, and I think that unlike a lot of African American brothers and sisters who have grandparents and great grandparents tell them the stories of what they went through the Deep South, and they are still seeing kind of, I guess, the consequences of that, and they're still seeing some of that similar treatment in America today. It's harder for Black people to assimilate with whiteness, unless, again, you're biracial and then you marry a white person, and that type of conversation, which is for another day. It's, I think, much easier for an Hispanic American who is not Afro, Latino, to assimilate. And the easier you can assimilate, the easier you are to probably forgive your government, to not to let bygones be bygones. So I hope I explained this well. I do vividly remembering my high school history books having some of these stories. I don't think it was as detailed as stuff that I learned in college, but if you most definitely just type in Latino segregation era, a lot of this stuff will pop up. All right.
So guys, welcome back. Let us know what you think about the video we just played on the comment section. I find that a lot of information of our history was erased, or the people who wrote it didn't write the complete information. So I find that it's upon you, if you want to know more about what happened in history, it's upon you to go and do your own research. There was a time we did an episode for you about how white people are taught history, and it was quite informative because the speakers we featured on that video, they were palm colored, and some of them were just realizing that their ancestors committed atrocities when they were going to colonize other nations, and those were things that they weren't necessarily taught in schools.
Right, and through this question that this woman asked is why we usually say that even if also Black Americans' history is represented, but it is severely underrepresented, and this is why we usually say it is important for us as a Black nation, us as a Black people, to write our own history, because it is not only in America, for the Black Americans, that is where their history has been somewhat eradicated. Here in Africa, you almost find little to no information about colonialism and what happened during the colonial era, because the things that you find that are taught in school, as you usually say, are just a base of what happened. And mind you guys, it's not only here in Kenya, but throughout Africa, at least with the British colonization, where when they were going back to their country, a lot of the documentation they did while in Africa, they were buried at sea, and others that couldn't be taken with them were burnt when they were leaving.
Yeah, there's also another important information the brother mentioned, was that the point about assimilation, yeah, and he said it's easier for people who are not Black to assimilate into the white community than it is for Black people. And guys, I can only ask you to guess why that is. Yeah, you can leave it on the comment section. So it's easier for them, Asian Americans, Hispanic people, to assimilate into that community. And this brings me to the next point, where normally the things that the system that has been created, yeah, Black people suffer the most for it. Why am I mentioning this? Is because even we've seen situations where even Hispanic discriminate against Black people, and that is due to them wanting to be that white proximity, them wanting to be close to power, yeah. So it's not a surprise that it's easier for them to assimilate, you know. And you ask yourself, where were they during the Jim Crow era? And I feel like it does make sense what the brother was explaining about the point of location and how many they were during that time. A bigger percentage of Black people were around compared to these other groups, and that is why whatever information that goes down in history, majority is of Black and white people. And I feel like a lot of the segregation was majorly against black people, because for obvious reason, melanin is a very strong color that can be seen from a distance. Yeah,
right. And with that being said, guys, please let us know what you think about this episode in the comment section, and we'll see you on our next episode. But before you leave, please consider subscribing if you're new to this channel.